Welcome everyone to the TIPI webinar series. My name is Ashley Durham. I am the Director of Alumni Engagement at the TIPI College of Business. Thank you for joining us today for our final event in the TIPI Women's Summit series. I hope that you've been able to participate in some of our previous events that have taken place. And if you haven't, there is a webinar that is recorded on the the college's YouTube channel, and I would encourage you to check that out. Today, I am excited to have Amy Colbert, Professor of Management and Entrepreneurship at TIPI, and Renee Gullickson, a UI alumnus and nurse practitioner, here to share their presentation on authentic relationships, the benefits of being known and valued at work and beyond. Some information before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box, not to be confused with the chat, in your Zoom control panel. I'll bring those up during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation today. As a reminder, all of our virtual presentations are uploaded to the college's YouTube page with closed captions a few days following the live webinar event. Finally, you are encouraged to stay until the end of the webinar so that we can gather your thoughts on today's presentation. Your feedback helps make all of our virtual programs even better, so we appreciate you taking time to answer our 4-question survey at the end of this presentation. Now I'd like to quickly introduce Amy and Renee. Amy is a professor of management and entrepreneurship in the TIPI College of Business, where she holds the Leonard A. Hadley Chair in Leadership. Amy's research focuses on the ways in which individuals connect with their work, their coworkers, their supervisors, and their organizations in ways that motivate and sustain them. She also studies leaders, examining the factors that contribute to effective leadership and the mechanisms by which leaders achieve results. Finally, she is interested in how identity shapes beliefs and decisions. Renee received her doctorate of nursing from the University of Iowa in 2015 and currently owns her own private practice in Iowa City. Previously, Renee worked as a mental health practitioner at the Women's Wellness Center at the UIHC. Renee has been practicing for the last 9 years and considers herself a holistic practitioner, blending her Western medicine training with Eastern practices. Renee did work in corporate roles prior to finding her second career in nursing, and she is an avid yogi and enjoys spending time traveling to yoga retreats and enjoys spending time with her family. Thank you both so much for being here today. And Amy, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. It's great to be here. And I just want to welcome Renee to our webinar series. Renee, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be able to blend my thoughts from research with your experiences from practice. Oh, and I think you're still on mute, Renee.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's an honor to be here. Thank you. And I'm excited to hear what you have to share, Amy. And I think this will be a wonderful way to blend some real life tools that I have learned into the workplace.
I can tell you that just in preparing for this, Renee and Ashley and I have had some really good coffee chats. So I'm excited to hear what comes up during the webinar as well. We appreciate all of you logging in and participating in all of the TIPI Women's Summit events. It's one of my favorite events of the year. It's a great way to celebrate Women's History Month. And today we're going to close out our series of TIPI Women's Summit events by talking a little bit about authentic relationships at work. And this is a topic that I am really passionate about. I've learned that Renee is as well. We really want to try to accomplish 3 things during our time with you today. We're going to talk about, first of all, what do we mean when we say authentic work relationships? What qualifies as something that would be described as an authentic relationship? We're then going to talk a little bit about why should you care? What are the benefits of having authentic relationships at work? I'll draw from some research that I've done, as well as research from my colleagues, and I'll tell a couple of personal stories too about how the people around me make my work life a lot better as well. And then we're really going to try to get into some very specific tips. How can you build and maintain authentic relationships given the challenges that you may face in your environment? We got some great questions from you when you registered, so thank you for that. We've put together some scenarios that we'll talk through based on those questions. But please, as questions pop into your head throughout the webinar, use the Q&A box. We'll get to as many of those as we can so that we can talk about the challenges that you're facing and how we might have some tips to overcome those. So that's our plan for our hour together. Let's start with a basic definition. Let's get aligned about what do we mean when we say authentic work relationships. A fairly simple definition that I often use is to describe these relationships as genuine human connection that happens with others at work if we're talking about authentic work relationships. This means that both parties in the relationship are telling something about themselves. They're disclosing. There's mutual self-disclosure. This goes both ways. And that both parties in the relationship are open and supportive in their responses to these disclosures. Sometimes the way that I describe this is you can be who you are in this relationship, right? You can be yourself. This is not a relationship where you have to impression manage. It's not a relationship where you have to worry if the side of your hair is sticking out from your microphone. It's a relationship where you come as you are. And there are some real benefits to that. And this is why I think authentic work relationships are so important. First of all, we know that human connection is a key driver of health and happiness. Right? So many good longitudinal studies have shown that people who are happiest in their lives have these connections. These connections are frequent, they are supportive, they are based in care and concern for one another. And when we have that genuine human connection in our life, it's a source of joy. I had the opportunity earlier this week to attend the University of Iowa's DEI celebration to celebrate the work that's been done over the year in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had a guest from outside the university, a Johnson County supervisor named V. Fixmore-Arrays, who was speaking. V said, "There's something so profound in allowing people to be who they are." And that really struck me. There is something profound in those moments of human connection that we have at work. Even if they're on the way to the restroom, at the water cooler, brief moments, they are moments that together provide a foundation for our well-being. The second reason why I think authentic work relationships are so important is in some ways illustrated by this picture. This is not a stock image. I am one of those yellow helmets in that raft. This is my family and I on vacation. They often convince me to do things that are slightly out of my comfort zone. But this has become the picture that I've used since the pandemic to illustrate the way that we often feel at work. Work can be a source of stress and anxiety. For many people, they're working directly with clients, with customers, with patients, with students in my case, who are going through their own sets of challenges. And one of the things that we know is that good relationships are a buffer for stress. They can prevent stress from turning in to the negative effects that might happen without those relationships. Sometimes in stressful situations, we refer to the theory of flight or fight, right? If we're in these stressful situations, we either want to get out of there or we're going to put up our dukes and we're going to do something about it. But there's another theory from evolutionary theory that says some people, and this is especially true for women, will go toward tend and befriend in times of stress. And I think that at this moment, it actually wasn't my family that was tending and befriending me. It was the guy in the back of the boat who had everything under control. But there are times when we have those stressful moments at work where these relationships allow us to move forward without experiencing burnout or fatigue. And finally, we don't leave ourselves at the door of our workplaces when we come to work. I started this fall, the new academic year, my 16th year, I believe, at the Tippie College of Business as a professor, doing much the same thing that I've always done. I teach classes on leadership. I do research, as Ashley described. I walked into the building that day, ready for another academic year. But right before that, I had dropped my youngest son off at college. He goes to Drake University. We had driven him to Des Moines. We had unpacked his stuff and said goodbye in the way that all the books tell you should, quickly, jumped back in the car. But as empty nesters, my husband and I were bringing something to work that was new to us. We were struggling a little bit with that. And it wasn't something that we easily left at the door. I had also recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and I've been very open about this at work because it does affect me every moment of my day, whether I'm at home or at work. These are the things that I bring with me as I come into the building. And so having people with whom I can disclose those sorts of things, with whom I can troubleshoot and talk to when things get stressful, has made all the difference in navigating those life events for me that also impact my work. Those same kids, I got to spend Christmas break or spring break recently with them. We went to basketball games at Des Moines, the NCAA tournament, spent a lot of time sitting with them. And they said to me, I was telling them about this presentation, getting ready for it. And they said to me, okay, fine, Mom, be yourself, but always, completely? It's a question I get a lot when I talk about authentic work relationships. And they specifically, being 19 and 22, they specifically said to me, if you really want to reveal, for instance, your awful taste in music, is that your best foot forward? I think my taste in music is fabulous. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you would like. But the fact of the matter is, there are some pieces of ourselves that we may be cautious about sharing. And when we talk about authentic work relationships, we don't always mean share everything with everyone all the time. There are pieces of ourselves that we may share with different people, and figuring out what the kinds of things that we want to share with our various colleagues can help us manage our work relationships in a way that leads to the most positive outcomes. When I think about what do you share with people at work, I start with the work itself, the tasks that we're doing. Some of my research has shown that when people are willing to disclose the things that they're very good at work and the things that they struggle with, the bandwidth that they have, and when they may be feeling overwhelmed, they're much more likely to be able to get support from other people around them and to provide that support as well. And so one thing that you may begin to disclose at work is more about your work and the ways in which you can contribute to the group as a whole. A second piece of ourselves that we oftentimes talk about at work are our career goals. We may have goals to move up in the organization, to try a new area, or even to try a different organization or career path. Having people that you can talk to about this and people who will support you as you move through those career development stages allows you to have positive career outcomes. This is something that we've done other webinars on, and Ashley talked about the TIPI YouTube channel. Please check that out as well, because I think this whole issue of how to find good mentors who can not only support you in your career and give you advice, but also serve as sponsors, people who will recommend you for that next level up, is a key for success. And especially for women, we often don't have as many sponsors as we might need. And so developing these kind of relationships can have benefits. Sometimes though, what we need to reveal is our stress. We need to vent. These kinds of emotional self-disclosures, I'm overwhelmed, I'm feeling burnt out, are opportunities for us to get support from others, and being receptive to these disclosures are opportunities for us to provide that sort of emotional support. We know that effective teams and work groups are not only focusing on the task itself, but they're also focusing on how are we doing while we're getting that work done? How much bandwidth and capability do we have? And how much do we need to step back and take a moment to address any of the stress and burnout that may be occurring? When this happens naturally in work groups, it helps everyone keep moving forward in a way that makes them both productive and happy at work. And again, that's what some of my research showed. Good workplace relationships can make us more productive, but they can also help us thrive at work and flourish. They help us achieve higher levels of well-being. And finally, work is also a source of friendship. Sometimes we talk about our outside interest, our music taste, the books we're reading, how excited we are about the Iowa women's basketball team. Revealing those kinds of personal things gives you a chance to get to know someone on a deeper level. And it is sometimes that strengthening of the connection that then makes them more available when you are struggling with the work itself, or with the stress that you may be feeling. And so as you think about the people that you have at work, we talk about authentic work relationships, but think about this as a continuum. You may share a little bit about a few things or a lot about all parts of yourself, but in doing so, there's two major outcomes that I think are so important in terms of providing individuals with the chance to have high levels of well-being, as well as the organization to function well. We know that when we're in these authentic relationships, we often feel seen or known, right? Somebody understands me. I feel valued because of that. And we also can develop a community where there's a sense of belonging and inclusion. Not only can everyone be themselves, but everyone is valued for being themselves. And that kind of workplace has benefits in terms of innovation and creativity, in terms of retention of employees, and in terms of long-term well-being as well. So I think it's important, and I've provided a link in the slides here to an article that I wrote about our research. It's a blog post, so it's very accessible. It's called Flourishing at Work is All About Relationships. And it goes into more detail about how each of these types of disclosures can provide you with the opportunity to gain the support that you may need to be productive and happy at work. I would also say the other thing we found from that research was that sometimes giving is as good as receiving, right? So thinking about the mutuality of these relationships is important as well. So next, we want to talk a little bit more about how can you build and maintain effective work relationships. And I'm going to turn it over to Renee to share some insights that she has from her practice as a nurse practitioner. And then I'll come back in with a couple of other research insights as well. So Renee, take it away.
Thank you, Amy. All of that was wonderful information. And I had so many things I could have said and add to, so this is going to be good. Yes, this book, The 4 Agreements, I'm not sure if anyone has read it. It's a very easy, quick read. And it's a Toltec wisdom book, as it says there. And I have been using this for the last couple of years, not only in my practice with clients, but in my personal life. And I try every day to reach these 4 agreements, and every day I fail, at least once, if not twice or more. But this first agreement, they sound very simple. I'm gonna just state the agreement and give a little bit of information, and I would love to keep time so that we can talk about specific examples. But the first one is to be impeccable with your word. And this one is very difficult, I believe. And this can mean many things. It can mean, I think the biggest one for me is our words can really hurt someone, and unintentionally. The tone in which we use our words is really important. People remember what you say about them and to them. And I think one of the biggest things in the workplace is, I think the word that comes up a lot is gossip. And so Amy did a great job of talking about our emotional related, that self-disclosure piece of, if you're having a reaction to something, it is good to be able to talk about it. And I think the key here with being impeccable with your word is to talk about how you are feeling, how it is affecting you, versus talking poorly about the person that maybe did something that you reacted to. The truth is, right, it was your reaction to a situation. So one can go to a friend or a colleague and maybe talk about what someone did, and maybe not be so kind to that person. It can be overheard. That is not being impeccable with your word. And so that's just a very slight, I think probably that workplace gossip is the biggest thing I wanted to mention for today. And in a family, this is a piece of those hard, hurtful things, and then being able to come back and apologize, because we are going to make mistakes. So we can make a mistake, but come back. I call that retroactive work of come back to it and apologize, right? And that can also be in the workplace. So I can talk a lot more about that, but I just wanted to get that piece. So move on to that second one, which is don't take anything personally. And this one's even harder. I think, especially as a woman, for myself anyway, I'll just speak for myself. I am always trying to manage everyone else around me, and I want everyone to be happy. And if somebody is angry or seems to be upset, I'm assuming that that I did something wrong. And I'm sure we've all been in those meetings or around people where it's like, gosh, what did I do? The truth is, and what the author here, Ruiz, says about this is, it's not about you. It is not about you. And I think that's what Amy was getting at. Also, I was thinking about this piece of, if we can share a little bit about what's going on in our personal lives, that would be great, because then maybe the people around you can recognize, oh, Amy already said this morning, she just dropped her son off and she's having a hard day. It's not that she's not listening to what I'm saying. It's not that she doesn't care what I'm saying. She's actually struggling a little bit herself. And so it helps you to not take things so personally. And this I'm going to add, and I can talk more about this, but this is a really, I think I have a bias here as a mental health professional, but if you are being affected by a human, and especially if you're noticing there's one person in your workplace or in your environment or in meetings that is, you are consistently finding yourself having a hard time with, this could be a sign to you that there is something within you that is getting triggered. And we all have wounds. I mean, I guess my belief of the world is every human on this planet has a wound of some sort. Some people use the word trauma, wound, whatever you want to call it, but we all have life situations that do affect us. And so sometimes people in our lives, in the workplace and our other relationships, activate those old wounds. And so if you're finding that you're in a meeting, or maybe it's your boss or a colleague that is causing you to feel a way in your body, maybe that's your jaw is clenching, your heart is pounding, you're feeling sweaty, you're feeling angry, listen to that. That is a sign that you're having some trouble with that specific person or relationship. And then what we can do is you can work with that on your own, right? And maybe that you can work with that piece of, why is this person activating that wound? And then ideally, once we heal those wounds, we can interact with those people in not such an emotional way. And I can talk more about that as well, but I just really wanted to mention that piece. So the third agreement is don't make assumptions. And I have to chuckle because I learned when I was young, I'm not sure how old, how to spell the word assume, A-S-S-U-M-E. I have younger kiddos, and I thought it would be funny as we talk about the 4 agreements. And I shared this little joke that if you assume, you're going to make an ass out of you and me. Because that's what I learned, the spelling. And so we use humor in our family to joke, because this is a shared language that families can use, workplace can use, is, oh, it sounds like you might be making an assumption. And that is never a good idea, really, for any situation. And so what the author here says is to ask clarifying questions. And so if you're sitting there in a meeting and it sounds like, oh, I think they're expecting me to take on more work. They're expecting me to do this. They're expecting this. And you're getting worked up and your blood pressure's going up. And then you go and you stew. And maybe you do have a friend at work that you go and tell, and like, I can't believe that they're asking me to do more. And this situation just goes, and you get mad and upset, and you've spent a lot of time and energy. Come to find out, maybe the next day or a week later, when you have a conversation, that isn't actually what was being asked of you. And so if we can notice, like, oh, I'm getting mad, I'm feeling like I'm being asked more, my jaw is clenching. That's my typical response. That's why I point to my jaw. But if you can notice that and take a deep breath and maybe just say, can I just ask a clarifying question here? It feels to me like you're asking X, Y, and Z. And that feels hard. I mean, this is something I'm learning, to be able to speak up like that. But that's a beautiful time. So I know that there are many people that don't have trouble with conversation, or like that feels like conflict. So if you're able to do that, start modeling that for your colleagues, because if one person can do that and say, hold on a second, I'm just feeling like you're asking this and this and this of me, that gives whomever the person was an opportunity to clarify, and the other people in the room to see that you can do that. You can ask for clarifying questions. And now, instead of stewing all day and night and being angry and wasting all that time and energy, you got the answers right there and you can move on. I think I have enough time. Yes. Yeah. The final one is actually quite easy, and I would rather leave room for questions, but always do your best. And I think this is just kind of in life, right? Just to know that you are going to absolutely make mistakes, and that you are trying all day long to do a little bit better with these agreements and with your colleagues. And the more you can model and the more that you can share this language, I have found both with clients and in my personal life, that it becomes a language that you can all share, and it makes it easier to bring it up. Like, you can even joke, I'm making an assumption here, I don't want to be an ass, right? And so then people can chuckle, and then you can say, I need to clarify something, right? So So doing your best, just knowing that you're going to make mistakes and to keep trying. And I think that's that's what I wanted to say about those, and happy to answer any questions. And I know we can talk more about that in the scenarios, Amy.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, though, because the whole idea of we're not going to always get this right, but to circle back, would you say just a little bit more about that? How do we circle back like gracefully and effectively to do some of that repair? Because it does happen a lot of times. I was stressed and I didn't think before I spoke.
Yes, I think it's really important, because I don't know about anybody else, but when I have something like that, then I stew. And then there's the beautiful shame and guilt. Anybody who knows Brene Brown knows her work on shame and guilt. We don't need to be carrying that around. So I think I referenced it earlier. I call it retroactive work. This means, like, people say, oh, I wish I would have said that, or I wish I would have responded with this. I wish. You can, right? And the beautiful part is, actually, I think for those of us who are learning to communicate and have hard conversations, it's actually better to come back at it when you are not feeling so emotional. And so that could look like, and I think we have a question about virtually too, it means just ask for a quick meeting. Right? It means a quick phone call of like, you know what, you said this earlier today, and I really didn't have enough guts to ask the clarifying questions. But I just wanted to know. Right. And it just is a matter of retroactive work. It doesn't have to be in the minute. If you're stewing on something, maybe you do have that one friend at work or a friend at home, you talk through it and it's still not feeling well. Of course, as Ashley mentioned, I'm a yogi, so everything is in my body. If it still doesn't feel good in my body, then you need to talk about it. And I would go into the person, like to address that, apologize, which is being impeccable with your word. Say, I'm really sorry I wasn't able to bring this up. I'm feeling bothered by this situation still, just to own that. So is that helpful, Amy?
That's so helpful. And I do think it helps us be clear, right? It's a little bit about having enough courage to be clear. And I'm a Brene Brown fan too.
Yeah.
And she'll say, clear is kind, right? And it's kind to be clear about where we are. It takes courage sometimes, but it does, I think, help us get to this foundation of trust, which we see time and time from research, that when we have trust in the workplace, when we feel as though we can be open and vulnerable, we're much more likely to be able to develop these relationships that allows us to ask for what we need, to clarify when we need to clarify, and to get those benefits of authentic relationships. So I think so much of what you talked about aligns really nicely with what we've learned from research, but that's definitely a point of connection between those 4 agreements and what I think of as the keys for authentic work relationships. I also like to think about authentic relationships as developing over time, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about one scenario that someone asked about with new teams. But initially, sometimes it's just about having curious conversations, right? I love to learn new things. The professor is a pretty good role for me. And so I like to be curious about people when I meet new people, coming in with that lens of curiosity. What can I learn? Being ready to listen in a way that's mindful. I think that's another important, and boy, thinking about your practice and work as a yogi, this idea that sometimes we need to get ourselves into a space where we can set other things aside and mindfully listen to others. That could be a whole nother webinar, how to be good, effective listeners. I think a couple of things that I've found in our research that really do seem to make a difference one is sometimes space. I sit across a desk from people when they come in. Students come in and they sit in guest chairs. But if I know we're going to have a conversation where I really want to be open and supportive, I'll simply move around my desk and clear that space. Sometimes I take 5 minutes to clear my mind, and I'll do a quick meditation so that I am setting aside everything else and ready for that. I'm leading a book club, a faculty book club right now, with a really great book called The Power of Flexing by my colleague Sue Ashford at the University of Michigan. And Sue says, you can think about all of your interactions as opportunities for small experiments, right? How can I do just a little bit better this time? Where can I improve my listening? And I love that approach. I think that goes into the always do your best, but we're always improving. The other thing that I think is really useful, and sometimes we don't have enough time for at work, is good generative conversations, those kinds of conversations where you're learning more about someone so that you can ask about how their kids are doing at college or what's going on in the sport that they like to play. Getting some of those opportunities to connect in good ways helps to build those relationships. But as we deepen our authentic work relationships, there is sometimes a need to be somewhat vulnerable. I looked up a dictionary definition of vulnerability this morning, and the dictionary definition that I found is able to be easily hurt, influenced, or attacked. This does not sound like something we would want to invite into our worlds, right? That vulnerability does have some risk to it. But vulnerability also is an opportunity to be very honest about our experiences and to be courageous about asking for what we need as a result of what's going on. And so if we can be vulnerable and model that vulnerability in our workplace relationships, and when other people are vulnerable, if we can react with empathy, if we can try to understand their experience, not assume that we know what they're going through, that leads us to be able to then be compassionate, which I think is the action that follows, right? To step up, to act in ways that give people what they need, and to help people feel known and valued. As a person living with Parkinson's disease, I fall occasionally, and I fell the other day in a meeting at work. My colleagues helped me up. We were all fine. But about a week later, one of my colleagues, who tends to be quieter and not necessarily somebody who I would say leads with compassion, came to my office and he gave me a CD. It's a jazz musician who has Parkinson's herself. And he's like, hey, I was just thinking about you and I thought you might enjoy this. Gosh, I felt seen. I felt really valued. I felt as though somebody cared for me in a way that was a small signal, but it was it made a big impression on me. And it made me realize how lucky I am to work in a workplace where I have those opportunities. That is one of three other considerations that I want to talk about really quickly before we move into a poll question and then some scenario conversation. There are differences in the degrees to which work environments support people being authentic and vulnerable at work. I teach executive MBA students, and I have had students before say, I would get eaten alive if I was honest about the way that I was experiencing the stress that I feel at work. And so I think this is an important thing to consider. Work environments vary in how supportive they are of authentic work relationships, but individuals within work environments are not necessarily always acting in ways that are consistent with the environment itself. So finding your person that you can be vulnerable with, finding the person who will help support you in those work environments would be the advice that I would give. There are also individual differences. I mean, by the time we get done with our hour together, you're going to know everything about me, right? I'm a person who shares. Not everybody does, and that is okay. There are times when there may be things that you don't want to share. Not everyone would share a medical diagnosis right away. And so thinking about what you're comfortable with and relating in ways that are consistent with who you are is another thing to consider. And then finally, I do think it's important to have these sorts of relationships at work. We are at work for lots of hours in every given day. We have stresses that are specifically associated with work, but we also know that our non-work relationships can help supplement. So having a friend who you can pick up the phone and call is also a good strategy if there's not that person in your workplace. And in fact, I'm starting a research project with one of our PhD students, Madison Mucci-Ferris, and I are going to do some survey work to understand how people put together networks that cross these boundaries. You have friends in your book club and friends in your religious community and friends in the community at large and at work. How do these folks come together to be a support, especially in times of stress? And so looking for all the resources is something that I believe in strongly as well. So I believe that Ashley is going to launch our poll question now. We just want to get you involved. A webinar is always a little bit of one way. And so we'd like to get you involved thinking about how many authentic relationships you have at work. You can define this however you like. Authentic relationships to me are the relationships in which I can be myself. I don't have to self-censor. I don't have to think about it a lot. They're the relationships that I go to for support when I need it. I am lucky enough to work in an organization, and I've been here for a long time, where I have lots of these. 3+ would be my answer. But sometimes just having that one person who you can be yourself with makes a big difference. And so if you are online and you can respond to the poll, Ashley's monitoring how many responses we're getting, and she's going to share the responses here in just a minute. Renee, how do you define, if you were answering this question, what do you think about when you think about how many work relationships you have, or authentic relationships you have at work?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking, I feel a bit like a hypocrite at the moment, but in my private practice, it's a little bit different, right? You know, I mean, it's private. And so I do have some colleagues that are up and down the halls, but I have had to work pretty hard on finding my authentic relationships with colleagues that aren't even in my office. And so we have to set up time to get together for coffee, and it has to be much more mindful, or I would be very isolated in private practice. But I do have 3+, but I've had to work pretty hard on that.
Yeah, it is. It's very different in different types of organizations. We're going to talk about remote work and how that may be different as well. It looks like Ashley shared the results, and I think everyone can see those on their screen now. We have 11 people who responded, about 7% who said they don't have any authentic relationships at work, 21 who have one, that's 13%. We have about 28% of people who have two, and then over half, 53% of people say that they have 3 or more authentic relationships at work. So you've already started to build this network of folks who can be supportive. And again, a lot of my research is like, how can we be productive and well at the same time? These relationships at work really are a key to that. Let's get into some conversation, though. I'm going to show a couple of scenarios, and I'm going to take the slides down as Renee and I talk through these. Just so that you don't have to look at slides the whole time throughout the webinar. But please feel free to keep the questions coming in the chat. We're seeing those, and we'll make sure that we leave time for those as well. But one of the questions that we got ahead of time involves joining a new team. How is it that you build authentic relationships when you join a new team? Renee, do you want to speak to that?
Oh, sure. I guess the first thing that I think, the word curious is what came up for me. And I'm maybe a little more timid in a group where I don't know folks. And so I'm imagining a lot of data gathering, right? It's kind of a matter of scanning your crowd and kind of knowing, when you're new to a team, you may get a feeling. And I, of course, like I said, go by my body. Who makes me feel calm? And who makes me feel tense. And so you notice those calm folks, and then maybe you just kind of do, I would say, a lot of listening in the beginning, right? To see how that feels. And then it is being impeccable with your word, right? Because those, especially when you're new to a team, how you establish yourself in those first few days, weeks, months, that is going to kind of set the tone for, are you one to gossip? Or are you not? Are you one to speak up, or are you a little more timid, right? And are you one to share? Or are you going to be the type of person that, needs to be asked some questions, but then will answer? So it's kind of it's an opportunity really when you join a new team to decide, how am I going to be? How am I going to be vulnerable, right? And then kind of trying that out. And I guess I would say curious is how to do that. What about you, Amy? What do you think?
Yes, curiosity is always my go-to, right? I like to be curious. I do think that thinking about how do you want to show up? You're right. This is an opportunity to think about how other people are going to see you as a relationship partner. And people make that decision very quickly, right? And so some of those initial interactions can really set the stage. But there's also good research that suggests that trust builds over time. Right. And so I think that being cautious, right, but also being open. Sometimes we're balancing those scales a little bit, but being cautious and open allows you to determine, where are the folks that you feel that sense of trust from? And how can you then build that over time as you have a longer time with those folks? I also think that there's a lot of times that we gravitate toward people when we form relationships because there's some similarity. And that can lead to us having a fairly homogeneous group of colleagues and friends and relationships, unless we dig a little deeper, right? Because we have overlap with everyone. It's just finding it. Where's that similarity? And so finding the people who want to talk to you about the fact that it's opening day of baseball season, or the people who would rather talk about the play that they saw at Riverside Theater this weekend. Knowing those, finding those little points of connection, I think can be a really good way to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm showing my prowess at the Zoom screen sharing here. We're going to go back and forth, but here's our second scenario that came to us in the registrations: remote work. Almost everyone was thrown into this very quickly during the pandemic, but more and more organizations are using either remote or hybrid work, where people are not in the same office. We're not talking over the water cooler. And the question is, how do you build authentic relationships when you and your coworkers are working remotely? Thoughts about that one, Renee?
Oh, you just mentioning the pandemic kind of causes me a little anxiety. Yeah, I think that this is a tricky one. And I kind of mentioned already, like I was kind of forced to reach out and set those up. And I think that is, if you're working remotely, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to initiate these types of relationships, because it's not going to happen naturally, like you said, in the break room or on the way to the restroom. I think the big piece that I think about here too is I know that delay when you're online, sometimes it's harder to speak up in a meeting. So this feels like one of those times where retroactive, conversation, it would be really appropriate for folks that are working remotely to be during that meeting. I could just see, an email during that meeting, I felt this way. And would we be able to set up a time to talk about that? I could see that needing to happen more often for remote folks, but maybe people are a little bit more apt to join in than I would be. I know my husband worked remotely and still does a lot of the time. He's at Collins, and he has a little chat that is really, really helpful kind of on these, that it's a nice way to be able to do his venting, and it feels kind of like a phone call, but and that feels really nice for him. I know that he's shared that and he uses that chat option quite a bit. So I guess those are kind of the big thing. I think it is more work though. Don't you think, Amy?
I absolutely do. And I do think that there can be more opportunity to make the wrong assumption in a virtual conversation as well. Especially, we know that being on camera is exhausting. If people are working fully remotely, that turning their cameras off for some parts of meetings may be necessary. But without those cues, it can be very easy to read something into someone's tone of voice. And so your suggestions about clarifying and not assuming, I think, becomes so important there. I've been really impressed. I do a lot of sessions with companies. We do executive education, and I've talked to them about what are you doing in small groups and larger groups so that you don't lose that sense of connection. And some of them are really strategic. Sometimes it's the first 5 minutes of a meeting is just, how was your weekend? Trying to approximate what it would be like if we walked into a conference room together. Others have told me that it makes sense to schedule that time outside of a meeting because people are like, TikTok, let's get to the agenda. If you're doing it at the beginning of a meeting, but having 30 minutes where it's just more conversational. The electronic means are also really interesting to me. So your husband's chat, having online communities that are maybe virtual book clubs or organized around shared interest can provide those chances for people to connect as well. And I think as we hire new employees who don't have existing relationships and are coming into virtual workplaces, that's where intentionality becomes even more important. So some good new research coming out about virtual onboarding and the need to make sure that people are building those connections. Yeah, good.
I'm glad to hear that research is being done. It's definitely needed.
Yes, because when we went virtual, I knew everybody, right? So having the weird chat on Zoom, it was fine. But if you don't know somebody at all, it's that
Be
much
very-
harder, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another challenge, and I teach leadership classes in our MBA program, and the biggest challenge right now is doing more with less. That's what my students tell me that they're struggling with. They're all full-time working professionals. And this question came to us: how do you find the time to develop authentic work relationships when your unit is short-staffed? This reminded me of a research study that I did recently with nurses who are working extra shifts, who have increased demands from patients. Finding that time to have an individual conversation can be really difficult. I've been impressed by the people who are able to send small signals, right? The thing in the middle of the day where I got you, a snack from the vending machine. I've left you a little note here. Those small signals to say, I see you, I care about you. I think those can go a long way in these environments. Renee, what would you add to this one?
Yeah, this one is tricky. I was a nurse on a busy staff unit, and it is difficult. But I was thinking about this, and it is, for me, it was trust. I love that, the little things. And it doesn't really take a lot of time, but this is where being like impeccable with your word actually is really important. If someone says, "How you doing?" Not, "Oh, fine, busy day." No, really. How are you doing? You only have a few, somebody might not ask you that again today. And to be able to say, "You know what, I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling. Thank you for asking." But just a deep breath and just that opportunity to be authentic and to really answer for real how you're doing, and maybe it is, if it's a good enough friend, it might be a hug, it might be, and then they bring the treat later for you, right? And so I think really being authentic in your responses to how are you doing, and it might only be a second, but also knowing that being the recipient of that does not mean that you need to fix whatever they're telling you. You talked about this earlier, Amy, and it's this piece of holding space. Most of us are fixers, and somebody tells us a problem and we want to fix it. Holding space is the phrase that I like to use. And I was taught by a mentor. She said, if you feel like you want to respond, just shut your mouth and count to 10 and just give a little more. She's like, just hold it. And then a lot of times they'll say one more thing that they need to say. And I use that all the time in my practice. But yet that can be held like, how are you doing? I'm really not doing well. And instead of quickly, just pause, they'll probably tell you the reason why. And then you go through, and that was holding space. And that was really, really helpful. And that only takes 30 seconds.
Yes, I call this the awesome question. And what else? Right? AWE, the awesome question. And what else? Because you're right, I'm a fixer, but providing that extra beat. I grew up in the Midwest. The Iowa culture is very comfortable to me. How are you? Fine. How are you? Right? We all do that. I've started asking, especially with my students who I'm concerned maybe they are just giving me the pat answer, fine. Instead of saying, how are you? I'm like, how's your well-being?
Oh, I love
just that little change, I think, gives them pause. And sometimes they'll still be like, doing good. And sometimes they won't. But the how are you has become such a part of the vernacular that we respond with fine. So I like those moments to be able to respond more authentically. I also think for people who are able to structure work and provide those beats in the day, to provide those 5 minutes of let's gather and connect, that can be really, it's hard to do if you're the person who's going from patient to patient, but that can be really powerful as well. All right, let's do one more scenario, and then I'm going to ask Ashley if there's any questions. I see a couple that have come in. So relating across differences, this could be all kinds of differences. The person who asked this question when they registered specifically asked about variety of generations working together. And I have a colleague at Miami University, Megan Gerhardt, who has a book called Gintelligence, where she talks about valuing the differences that each generation brings. Sometimes we focus on the fact that these people communicate differently than I do, have different interests than I do. We see the differences. She's like, there's some value in those differences. There's some wisdom from all generations. So she would look for those points of connection where we can appreciate the differences. Renee, what would you say for this one?
Oh, this one is kind of near and dear. Some of my work on loneliness is talking about connecting the different generations. And I love that you use the word wisdom. That is the key. So because our young folks have wisdom about technology and different things that our older generations don't have, and obviously vice versa, lived experience that our elders have. And I think trying to, the other piece is wisdom and curiosity, being curious about what someone might and why they're responding that way. Oftentimes when someone seems rigid or upset, and I hear that oftentimes. I have a lot of clients who talk about older generations, and it seems like they're mad or they're not willing. And, that usually just means they don't have the language yet. A lot has changed in the world of mental health and communication in my lifetime. And so just to have patience and grace that, I would say people who are in their 70s and older certainly didn't have language to talk about their emotions, definitely not at work. Right. And so we're making progress. And so I would say kindness and patience to those folks who didn't grow up, maybe even coming to therapy. I have a lot of young clients that come to therapy, and, that wasn't an opportunity for some of our elders. And so they're learning later in life. So being kind and patient, I guess, is what I think about that.
I love that. Ashley, I see we've had more questions come in just in the last minute or so. Can we get to some of those?
Yes, let's do that. The first question that I'm seeing is, what should you do when you practice these skills and circle back on a conversation in a respectful way, yet the other person reacts negatively, especially when it's a person in a power position like a boss?
Mhm.
Renee, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yeah. So I think I just want to make sure, I think it sounds like if we're going back, so somebody's feeling bothered, they go back with that retroactive and bring up something that is bothering them. I think the key here for the person that you're speaking to not become defensive is to not use you language. If you come in and say, you did this and you said that and you do, right? And then the person is certainly going to be defensive. So the key here, and this isn't just at work, in every relationship, if you can use that I language, like this situation made me feel this way, and I am assuming I was having, and I just need a little clarification. If you go in that way, owning that you have some questions and emotions about it, it is going to be really unlikely that that person is going to be defensive. Now, they might be uncomfortable with you talking about your feelings. That's a different situation. But as far as defensiveness, if you go in owning it and not using the word you, I think that will usually cover that. I don't know, Amy, do you have any thoughts on that one?
No, I think that covers that really nicely. Thanks, Renee.
Yeah.
Another question is, any tips for reestablishing your authentic self after you've been in the same workplace for quite some time?
I've been in the same workplace for a very long time, and I'm actually a Hawkeye alum. I did my PhD here. So the folks that I've worked with, many of them have seen me for the last 25 years of my life. And I do think that's an interesting question because we all change. Right? We all change as we go through our work lives in lots of different ways. And I think that sometimes it can be helpful as new people come in and you reintroduce yourselves. Others begin to see the ways in which you've changed as well. And so being able to establish that, I think, is really important. The whole idea of thinking about how you want to show up and what signals you can give to people, that may be something that has changed. So for example, I have been the benefit of lots of great mentors in my career. And now I'm at the stage where I would like to be seen as a mentor. And so having times where I reach out to somebody and offer to take them to coffee, as my mentors did for me, starts to provide those signals of shifts. And so I think there are a number of ways that you can be really intentional about reestablishing, this is who I am right now.
Another good question we have is, how do you handle the relationship when you are always the giver and aren't really receiving anything back in that relationship? Just to clarify. So they're a relationship, and how do you handle it when you're the giver and not the receiver?
Yeah, Renee, I feel like I was going to alternate with you, but you're getting the hard questions. Do you want to
Oh,
take
no.
that one? Okay.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Good.
That's a tricky one. And I think we've probably all found ourselves in one of those relationships. And resentment can build and it can be negative. And truly a relationship, I mean, I don't actually know the definition right at this moment, but what I believe a relationship is that there is give and take. And that kind of depends on how long the relationship has been. I know a couple of couples that I work with where it might be a year where one is picking up the slack, and then the next year, the other one is, or that might go every other day, every other week. So I guess one question would be, if you're always the one giving, then it probably is an issue of boundaries, right? And being able to say, this is a hard conversation, being impeccable with your word to say, I am feeling like I'm giving a lot and maybe not receiving as much from this relationship. That's a hard conversation to have. And if you're unable to have that, that can be the situation of, you know what, I do have a few minutes to listen. Do you want me to hold space for you? Are you looking for advice? Asking clarifying questions. Because if they're just coming in to dump, right, and all you need to do is hold space, that's different than really needing from you, right? So it is a matter of, if you find yourself not receiving any benefit from that relationship, then I would say boundaries, probably some boundary needs to be set. Do you have anything to add to that, Amy? I'm not sure if that was.
Yeah, no, that was great. And I would also say in the workplace, sometimes there is a situation where I'm mentoring someone that's younger, and what I'm getting out of that is the opportunity to mentor. But I know that I'm looking for what I need from other relationships. And so sometimes I have to fill my need in a broader network.
Oh, that's good.
And I think we have time for two more if we do it quickly. Can you talk about authentic relationships in a manager-employee relationship? I feel more guarded in these relationships, but do want to have strong relationships with the employees I oversee.
Yes. When I teach leadership, I always talk about leaders doing this kind of balancing act, which is hard to do on Zoom. But there is the need to project confidence and to be seen as somebody who is going to lead effectively. Vulnerability has its benefits in that relationship as well. And so I think that the thing that I guide leaders to first is creating the opportunity for people to feel like they can disclose around the kinds of work challenges that they're facing, being the person who's there for them to clear that path. That's the first step. And that, I think, has fewer risks, and it builds that opportunity to build trust. And then those relationships may develop into broader self-disclosure going both ways. But ultimately, I think a really good first step, if people say, my manager has got my back, they're getting the obstacles out of my way, they're there to support my work, that's a really good foundation for a good relationship.
And then this will be our last question. But how to approach finding and healing issues when you feel a person triggers something within you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, really, you do have to be in touch with yourself, right? This is a matter of, you're not going to get your journal out in the middle of your meeting, right? And start journaling about what part of you just got activated. But I actually would do that work. I would do that work when you got home. I would notice, you reflect on your day and think, okay, in that meeting, what happened? It was this person, they were that age, they were talking about this topic. If you give yourself the time and space, that could be 10 minutes of journaling, or it could be, it sounds a little crazy, 10 minutes of talking out loud to yourself, right? There is a part, I do a lot with internal systems, internal family systems parts work, but there's a part of you that got activated. It's not all of you, but if you could give that part some attention, there's a great book called No Bad Parts that would be really helpful. And if you all have questions or want resources about those types of things, I'm happy to send some resources out. About how to do that. And if you're unable to do that work yourself, I do highly recommend that everyone has a therapist. I know I'm biased, but I see someone monthly to go through and to bounce these things off. So being willing to do that work and look inward is really important, in my belief, to heal this planet. So if we can all heal ourselves by doing that work, that would be wonderful.
And that's a great segue into the fact that Renee and I are happy to continue the conversation. You can connect with me on social media. I oftentimes post research insights on my social media, but I'm also available via email. Renee, you shared your email address as well, but I know that you also wanted to share some other community resources.
Yeah. These practitioners here, I know the first two, Andrea and Jesse, are both, I know I just spoke with them this week. They are accepting new clients. And then these are some other practices here in Iowa City that I have colleagues at that I greatly trust. And all of these folks would be able to help do that work, right? Just to have someone to bounce things off of. They're wonderful.
Great. Ashley, do you want to wrap us up?
I do. Well, thank you, Amy and Renee, and thank you everyone for attending this special Tippy Women's Summit edition of the Tippy webinar series, Presentation, Authentic Relationships, the Benefits of Being Known and Valued at Work and Beyond. When this event ends in just a moment, you'll see a quick survey. I'd be grateful if you could share your thoughts and help make our future virtual events even better. On behalf of the Tippy College of Business, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you'll all be cheering on the Iowa women's basketball team tomorrow in the Final Four. As always, go Hawks.